EU school, where we use the Charlotte Mason curriculum, Lindamood Bell, Farnborough Sixth Form College and the Oratory School. Those two places I've worked the last two. I'm going to talk about the ages and stages, early years, primary and secondary. So today let's begin about 50 years ago when I went to primary school at the age of 2. I went there and we followed Charlotte Mason's curriculum, and her motto was I am, I can, I ought, I will, and that's still valid today and a really good inspirational quote. When we were at school, we did picture study. And we used to do this from a very, very early age. And here's an example here from the picture study portfolio from Charlotte Mason. During the picture study lesson, we would ask the children to tell you about the picture, tell them how large it was, let the children look at the picture silently for a few minutes, looking closely at the detail, and then ask the child to narrate the picture, telling us as much as they could about the painting. And you'll have a sort of picture talk about that painting that they were looking at. So here's Van Gogh's self-portrait. And Van Gogh lived between 1853 and 1890. He was a Dutch artist, and he didn't really have very much money, so he used to paint himself and do a lot of self-portraits. Here, this is his self-portrait, and a lot of his time he actually spent in an asylum, and they thought he had gone a bit mad, to be honest. But what you notice, they're really vibrant colours, and how he's used this blue and the purple, bluey purple on the background in his ginger beard and ginger hair really stand out there. So you'd ask the child what they can see, what they think, their emotions, what they feel about the picture. And that was really, really good thing to do all those years ago, because later on in my life, when I visited the Louvre in Paris, I said, I've seen all these pictures before, and I couldn't understand why I'd seen them before. And it was at primary school when we studied them. And I know with the Charlotte Mason curriculum now, they still encourage children to look at old master paintings. Here we've got about visualizing and verbalizing. So if you actually go to 34 years ago, Pat Lindamood and Nancy Bell set up a company called Lindamood Bell, and they were really into visualizing and verbalizing. So you look at something and then you talk about it to enable those children to learn to read. And here's an example here where Christina and Valentina, who work at Lindamood Bell in London, showed me this diagram of a snail, and they said what they do with the children is they get the children to look at the snail and then describe it and visualize that snail. How big is it? How big is the ant? How big is the snail in relation to the ant? What's the grass doing? Is it moving? And things like that. What are the shapes in the picture? And to be able to look at something and verbalize against that is really, really useful, especially later on when you're going to pass your GCSE and A-level exams, particularly in science, and I'll go through that later. And the good thing about Lindamood Bell is that they've done research, and you can see here that their levels increase with increasing time with that intervention, and also that the brain changes as well. They've done fMRI scans, and you can see that Broca's area increases. So there's visualizing and verbalizing on what Lindamood Bell, that's what Lindamood Bell call it. But with the Charlotte Mason curriculum, you're talking about observation and also narration. So it's a similar thing. And so here we've got, Charlotte Mason would call it observing that picture, and then talking, narrating, whereas Lindamood Bell, 34 years ago, now call it visualizing and verbalizing. But isn't it amazing that Charlotte Mason's work all those years ago is still valid today? So here I'm going to talk about dyslexia and multisensory approach, and we're going to go through the ages and stages from the early years, the primary and the secondary. And first of all, I'm starting at the early years, and my son went to Pebbles Day Nursery, which is in Farnborough, and they said your son has quite poor your son has poor hand-eye coordination. He's quite good at maths, but there's some shapes he doesn't know. So what did I do about that? Well, later on, in a couple of slides, I'll show you. Linking back to your homeschooling and the Charlotte Mason approach, what you do is your morning basket, you've got Bible, memory work, map work, poem memorization, read aloud. You've all heard of all this sort of thing before. Hymn study, science, artist study, poetry reading, French, nature, composer study, virtue reading, Shakespeare and artwork. So there's a nice slide there with an example of a homeschooling basket. But when I look at my PNEU school many years ago, when we were following this Charlotte Mason curriculum, we would start the morning every morning with our morning basket with the assembly. We would have a reading from the Bible, and we would always sing hymns in the morning. We would do what you call memory work. We'll do map work, read loud. We would do all the same things on the left, but in the afternoon, we would actually do things that weren't so strenuous, if you like. We would do artwork. We would also often play bulldog in the playground. We'd play football. We'd go swimming. We used to do nature studies. We used to go nature walks. We used to sing songs. But one really important thing that links to Charlotte Mason again here is that we used to go and play in the field. And Charlotte Mason said that it was really important for physical activity and looking at natural structures. And she said it was really good for climbing. And we used to traverse the whole of the field on the trees and learn how to climb, learn how to make mud pies, learn how to pick grass. And it was so important for being outside. We also used to have judo. We used to play in the playground. But something we used to have that many of you may recognize were these programs for schools and colleges, whereby you would see these little dots disappearing. And when they all went, that was when the program started. And we really enjoyed that. And on a Friday afternoon, we used to do poem memorization. I'll come to that later. So for the ages and stages, the early years in school, this is what the manager at the nursery said. She said to me that my son's control and coordination wasn't that good. So I bought him a swing ball. She said that his shapes weren't very good, so we looked at food packaging. And I would say to him, could you pass me the rectangle bar of chocolate, please? Could you pass me the cylinder of tomato soup, etc.? And so he would use those words in his vocabulary to remember those shapes. For maths, we used to use songs. We used to chant, 5 and 5 is 10, 6 and 4 is 10, 7 and 3 is 10, 8 and 2 is 10, 9 and 1 is 10, 10 and nothing is 10. We used to march around the village and say that all day. We used to sing in the car. We used to sing songs. We used to sing the times tables in the car until that CD completely wore out. We used to look at the tiles on the floor, the tiles on the wall, and try and count out numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc. But what I found really useful was visualization. Okay, and that was looking at a box of eggs, seeing there were 6 eggs in there. 6 eggs make 2, 2, 2. They make 3, 3. They make 4 and 2. And feeling those eggs and actually feeling what 4 feels like, feeling what 2 feels like, and then going on to the 10s in the second egg box there. I visited a student at a Montessori nursery, and they said that it was important to use this sensory motor approach. And so she showed me these rods, and then Bryony kindly from Ochre Books drew me this lovely set of cocktail sticks that I made for my son with beads on it. But you could use anything you like there. What's really good is to use an abacus, but I would choose one where you've got 2 different colours to make up the 10, so that child can actually feel what 5 and 5 is 10 feels like, and then they can do their maths and then start counting in 10s and work out what's going on, which is really good. Going on to literacy, what is your perfect book and how do you prepare for exams? As a child, we used to go to the library. This is Woodcote Library in Oxfordshire, and we used to pick up 20 or 30 books a week, to be honest, but they were early readers and you could read one very, very quickly, and there's some examples of them there. I used to give my son audiobooks, and he would listen to those in the evening before he went to sleep. So he was familiar with the words of Horrid Henry and the characters. He then got some videos, so he's even more familiar with what naughty Horrid Henry did. But then we got the books, and in order to get to that point, it was really important to sort of lay those foundations of, you know, the keywords, who the characters were. He recognized the stories and he launched into there. But if your children are finding difficulty reading, then you can use Project Gutenberg. You can download those. You can Kindle books, you can have Apple books. And what's really fascinating is that you can actually get 500,000 books downloaded from the RNIB. You don't have to be visually impaired, but if you had dyslexia, you could also get get them. If you've got autism and various other conditions, you can also get books from the RNIB Bookshare. There's also Calibre audio library you can use as well, which was really good. Something I can't see on the screen here because your faces are in the way, but on the right hand side over here somewhere is scanning pens. And scanning pens, you can run a pen over a piece of text and it will read it to the child. You can also use these in exams, and scanning pens are giving a free 10-day trial at the moment. So if anybody's interested in that, that thinks they've got a dyslexic child. Okay, literacy, we used to make these cards. My son was really into dinosaurs, so we made these. And on my website, you can get a download of this and make your own for whatever topic that your child is interested. If it's birds or if it's trains or whatever, you can make your own. These are some pairs cards that come in with the Oka book stuff. They're quite nice and clear, and the language is really easy to read. So at primary school, so this would be Key Stage 1, 2. The teacher called me over once at parents' evening, and it was a history teacher, and he said, there's something not quite right about your son. He's really good in class, really good orally, but he's no good at writing things down. So he said, I want you to sort it out. And I said, okay. So I found a lady who was our old head of curriculum support at college, and we sent him for 2 days for a dyslexia assessment. And she asked him to draw a picture of a jungle. And he drew this picture. That's not necessarily his picture, that's one I got off the internet. And what she said was that choosing the subject of the jungle, his language is articulate, expressive and very descriptive, bringing the sense of feeling, hearing and smelling. He planned the essay drawing a cartoon of his thoughts on the jungle, confirming that he was a visual learner. And all through school, it was really fascinating because the teachers always said from the age of about 5 or 6, your son's not very good at English, is he? And I said, no, not really. And it was always sort of playing catch up. And the English teacher said to me one night, he's got to do this essay and it's got to be about the forest. And I thought, oh, that's fascinating. I'm really going to go for this tonight. So we sat down and we talked about walking in the forest, what it sounded like, what it touched, smelt, tasted, all that sort of thing, and made this brainstorm, first of all the things he could remember. Then we mind mapped it and we spoke about it. And then he wrote it down. He wrote a paragraph. Then he wrote another one. And then he wrote a page, which is unheard of. And then he started going on to the next page. And I said, you don't need any more, you can stop. And he was going, I want to write some more, because we'd given him some structure and he understood what he had to do. Once I knew that my son had dyslexia, I then bought this Nessie book, which is really easy to use, and you can download it off the internet free, and it's well worth having a look at. I also contacted the Helen Arkell Centre and also looked at the BDO website to see if there's anything I could find there that would help him. But when I realised how my son learned, I thought, well, you've got to teach him like an onion. You've got to go for the core information in the middle and then layer it out in different ways to enable him to remember it. And so at primary, there are all these different subjects that we had to do, and the spellings would come home, and I would get flashcards and I would cut them up and I would make these little key rings full of his different spellings he would have on a weekly basis. What would happen is the teacher would give me his spellings, you know, for the week, and then he was left-handed, so he couldn't actually read as he was writing them what he was doing. So then I switched it to the right-hand side, and I found that he could read yellow more easily, so I highlighted that in yellow. Then I made them on the computer, and later on I made them into strips. But what I did find is that if I gave him some spellings on blue, he really didn't remember those. And I thought that was quite fascinating, to be honest. So I used to do them all in different colours. WHA is yellow, WHE is orange, WHO is pink, WHI is green. And so we would colour code them so that he could remember them a bit better. Okay, now poems, again with Charlotte Mason, poems are really, really important. And I loved studying poems when I was a child, and every Friday afternoon the headmistress used to, we had wooden floors just like this, and she used to draw a chalk circle at the end, and we had to stand in this circle and we had to recite poems. And we also had to do some prose as well that would enable us to eventually be confident in public speaking. So my first poem I ever learnt was Colour by Christina Rossetti. And I remember reading this, and the first time I read it thinking, I don't know what this all means. And then I took it home and my dad read it to me, and he animated that poem. What is pink? A rose is pink by a fountain's brink. And we went through this, and I still remember it. And I actually found my first book of poems in my drawer at my parents' house about a month ago, and it's still there, The Colour, poem by Christina Rossetti. My son had to learn a poem, and this is really, really complex. It's from the World War I, and a lot of the language in here is really difficult to understand. And so what we did was, this before action poem here, we actually started to animate it. We acted it out, and then I gave him sort of sketches of what all those words meant. And here you can see it's typed up, but originally I just wrote it out and then sort of did cartoons around the words so that he could remember it. And it took forever, and we would have to do one at a time, one verse at a time. It was really hard, but eventually he was able to remember it. And I do have a recording, but I don't think we'll have time to hear that today, so I'll move on to the next slide. And by learning about these poems, when they get to GCSE and they have to learn Tiger, Tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, they've got an idea of what this is. But the problem is with dyslexics is they find inference skills really hard, and so you would have to explain what these poems were all about. Project work, and you probably call it something else than Charlotte Mason language. I just call it project work for today. Notebooking, I think you probably call it. How can these help raise students' aspirations? Well, if you're just copying stuff out of books, you're surface learners, you're just doing what we call the lower command verbs, identify, name and list. They might be passive learners, they fail to tie information together and they focus on the external rewards. But deep learners, when you do these projects, you're actively constructing that knowledge, you're giving meaning to that material, you're focusing on those internal words, and you're highly self-motivated. And so when I was at school, again, back to the Charlotte Mason era, we used to have these look it up books, and we used to have to look up these amazing but true questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Why do seas taste salty, etc.? And what was absolutely fascinating was that I only remember one of these from my Look It Up book. Every week I used to go to the Arthur Mees encyclopedias, which was really, really useful because it helped me when I went to university to do chemistry and look up all the journals, because I practiced it all the time at primary school. And then from those Arthur Mees journals, those Arthur Mees encyclopedias, I then looked up what the willow pattern plate was all about. So it's a Japanese fairy tale originated in China, and it's a story about two lovers and how they separated, and these two lovers are represented by the two birds there. There's some more information on the right hand side, but how something that I did, 45 years ago, I still remember today because it was so important to me. And that reason was because of the hook that I remembered going out with mum and dad to a furniture shop, and that willow pattern plate was on one of the dressers. And I said to the shopkeeper, I said, can I have that to put in my Look It Up book? I was so proud that I had a real willow pattern plate there. So here's another project. It could be anything. It could be the Romans, it could be the Battle of Hastings, it could be the Anglo-Saxons, but today it's the Egyptian mummification. And my son had to do this at school, but you could do this at home. We made a PowerPoint slides, and here we actually made these things. So the Egyptian mummy here, we made up out of a blow-up skeleton and covered it in mod rock, which is bandages with plaster of Paris. I made the canopic jars at pottery. I made these amulets at pottery, and the brain here, what the Egyptians used to do, they used to get a hook and hook out the brain from the skull. I also made these 2 pairs of eyes, and they came from a pair of gobstoppers from the sweet shop. And we've got some gold sweets there that I got to represent the gold that was put between the bandages in the Egyptian mummification process. We also built a medieval castle. This is actually from the internet, and we actually made it out of foam board, and we cut it up and sprayed it with stone spray, and it looked really good. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of that original, but what you could do, and this is actually a table planner for my friend's wedding. You could use Lego people and act out, for example, the Battle of Hastings 1066 or something like that, and children would really love that. You could make figures out of Play-Doh. You can use whatever you like. Coming back to yesterday, there was a discussion at lunchtime yesterday, and I think it was Mercy said Latin is really important. And here we've got the Roman house, and this was really difficult to remember the different rooms in the Roman house. And every week my son really struggled with Latin when he went to school, and you may struggle with Latin teaching it at home. So what we did was we went and made a mind map of all the important words, and we put pictures and words together, because you use words one side of your brain and pictures the other. And then we went down to Pangbourne, and we found this gathering, these trees on the side of the river, and we actually walked through the trees, and my son could look round and see this would be the atrium, the biggest room in the Roman house. This would be the impluvium, where all the rainwater collects. This would be the culina, where the kitchen, where you cook all the food. These rooms here would be the cubiculums, and that would be the bedroom, and at the back would be the hortus or garden. And amazingly, I actually found the email from the teacher that she wrote to me years ago recently, and it said, I just wanted to let you know that B got 4 marks in his spellings today. He also seems much happier. For French, we did dominoes. We've got pictures and words, and the more it links to that child, the better. You'll also see that it's in pink for the female words and blue for the male words. We also played French Monopoly, so you're linking geography and languages together there. About 15 years ago, I taught a boy at home, and he was struggling with maths, and I made these what I call magic maths numbers, and we taught him to add up using these numbers, and he used to love playing with them. He also found it easier to imagine those numbers on dice, and therefore to be able to add them together and sort of visualize those well. And Charlotte Mason, you call it observance. Something he really struggled with was hundreds, tens, and units, and I made him special glasses out of fluorescent paper. And for units, we would have one little eyeglass, tens would go on the other eye, hundreds 2, and thousands, we had this pair of glasses with 3 bits in it. And I would say, is that a unit? And he'd have to put the right glasses on. Is that a 10? Is that 100? And he used to love playing that game. We made a vest with measurements. This could be made out of fish and chip paper, for example, or even newspaper. It doesn't have to be anything posh. And then he would wear that when we were talking about measurements. We also made a tie with all the different shapes on it. And would you believe it? One week I went into his kitchen to go and work with him, and the full wardrobe was on the wall. He was so proud of all these things he had made. He was so excited about it. And this is a bow tie that I made in my classes, PEGX, point, example, explanation, relate. So whenever we were doing exam questions, they would make sure that they would give their point, their example, explanation, and maybe relate it back to the question. I'm now coming back to the PNEU school. I'm coming to science and nature walks. Nature walks are really important for Charlotte Mason. I remember going out for nature walks every Wednesday afternoon. And the teacher said to me, the headmistress said to me one day, Susie, can you find a really interesting plant? I said, oh yes. Mrs. Jacobs said, here's a really interesting plant. It's got purple and yellow flowers. And she said, Susie, don't touch that. It's deadly nightshade. So at least I learned something useful that day. There's a nature book here that we made going for a walk in the forest with my son. So if you go for a walk, you go to the seaside, you could make your own book about what you're doing that day. And I did a summary of what you might see along the way. For secondary school, this is stuff that I've done with boys in curriculum support at the Oratory, or also in the Sixth Form College, Farnborough. First of all, on the left, we've got the paper chains, whereby one boy doing A-level English couldn't link the characters together. And so he linked them all together with his paper chains. And then by the end of the lesson, I said, oh, come on then, James, I'll throw these in the bin. He goes, no, miss, I'm taking these away with me. These are my revision and I'm going to help everybody else. Again, quite often the boys can't link all the meth, eth, prop, but, hex, hep, non, dec alkanes, and so we did those with paper chains so that they could see the sequence. One boy came up to me one day and says, miss, I can't do the leaf. So we made out of funky foam here, and he really enjoyed it. And I went to the co-op in the morning, I bought a load of biscuits. So we made it out of biscuits. He really enjoyed that because he could then go and eat the biscuits at break time with his friends. And then about a week ago, I went into the park and made the leaf out of leaves. So you could go out with the children and make pictures of anything in the forest or in the garden with leaves. And I'm sure they'd really enjoy that. Here's the cell. This is actual diagram for my students for the cell. And Oka have actually got the artist to draw this for me, and the one on the right is actually from Pinterest, I think you call it, where you slice a ball and then put the different parts in with, it could be modeling clay or it could be Play-Doh or something like that. This is the human body, and my class is right at the end of the academic year now. We would start after half term to do anatomy. And then we can start with that human body, and then our students drew round themselves and then put all the different organs in there. And the one on the right hand side is really beautiful and really, really neat. Here, I work with a boy at the Oratory on chemistry. This is actually caffeine, the chemical structure there. And I would put the main points in the piece of paper. Now, this piece of paper I quite often use is tabletop paper that they use as banqueting roll. You can buy it in Costco. I don't know if you're from somewhere around the world, if you might not be able to get access to that. But he really enjoyed that because we would use giant pens and then draw out the main points in here, and it could be alcohols, alkenes, alkanes, definitions on the left, and then summary bits that we would do in post-it notes. And then you could do summary questions there as well if you were interested. The famous science triangle, the physics triangle, densities, mass over volume, speeds, distance over time, moles is mass over relative atomic mass, moles is mass over relative molecular mass. The boys love this. They love you buying these call out cards. You can get them from the range or the pound shop for pound, and then you put the words on those ones, and then you can put the numbers on post-it notes. They love that. They love moving them around, and then they could work out their calculations. Alternatively, you could use these hexagons where you've got densities, mass over volume, and then rearrange them, particularly rearranging equations and maths. Storyboards are really good, and I use these again at the Oratory for English, for chapters in plays, and also for RE, for miracles and parables. This particular one comes from a history teacher at college, where he said that you could have a main question here, and then you could traffic light the cards that go with that question. So you might have a red card is the most common answer, a yellow card the next common answer, and a green one another answer as well that the exam board accept. Some of these things from years ago that I did, such as composers at primary school and remembering all them, learning about Bach, Beethoven, Handel, Liszt, Mozart, Elgar, people like that. Later on, when I studied O-level music, I just knew it all already because I'd studied it as a child, and as a child you soak all that information up as a sponge, and you don't realise how much you remember later on when you study it. For the periodic table, I've put this in for a bit of theory for you. Basically, when you look at the periodic table, the boys really wouldn't understand very much of it when you first do it with them. So they look at the elements, they don't know what it is, they don't get it. And then the next stage is that they can sort of define keywords. They can then recognise a few of the elements. They recognise on the first group down, lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, cesium, francium. Na comes from natrium. That's why it's Na. And then they can list ideas, describe things, that those elements are getting larger as you go down the periodic table. You're increasing the number of shells. They can link their ideas together so they understand what goes on in group 1. Then they can work out what's happening in group 7. And then they can extend those ideas about the periodic table. And I know that we were talking about the disappearing spoon the other night, if anybody was listening to that. That's supposed to be a really good book to read too. Here is an example of what I did at college. It's the equality and diversity tree. Here we had equality and diversity training in the morning, and then I brought my puppets out in the afternoon and explained what it would be like for students in your class if they're hearing impaired, visually impaired or mute. And every single teacher was given a leaf, and they had to walk to the front and put that leaf on the tree. And that leaf something on that leaf, the teacher had to write on there about how they were going to use equality and diversity themselves in their department or for the college. And that formed the whole strategic plan for equality and diversity for the college for the next 5 years, which is really nice. But using that idea of the tree, I think knowledge is like a tree, and at home you're using nature and nurture. By nurturing that child, you can then help them to be able to access the curriculum and to be able to do those different subjects such as English, maths, humanities, arts, science, and languages. The revision is really important, especially for exams. I think you call it memory work with the Charlotte Mason curriculum. And there's lots of different ways that you can remember things and actually help you to construct essays and things like that. In this slide, I've got here an example that's actually in the multi-sensory book that I've written. And this was done with my niece and nephew. My brother said, oh, Ingrid and Oscar, they just can't write essays. And I said, oh, okay. So I sat in the back of the car between Staines and East Grinstead, about an hour's drive, took my connective keyring, and we wrote stories. We wrote stories on the little whiteboards on the back, and the children actually took their different suites and linked all these stories together using the connectives. They would then start with the keywords, and then we put touch, taste, smell, and we created this amazing story by the time we actually reached East Grinstead, and they became more confident in writing stories in their creative writing after that. Also, again, I've said to you before that you could use paper chains, and here we've got things called dominoes, which we've used for English before. So here is the book that's got all the ideas I've spoken about in. It's published by Ochre Books. It's $3.99, and to be honest, you couldn't print it for that money. The original photos that I used for my multisensory techniques are published in the Dyslexia Friendly Schools Guide, but that is only a small article in there. And the latest book that is going to be written, I've done the draft, and I can see Bambi's photo here from Ochre Books on my computer at the moment, and that's going to be How to Become a Grade Riser. That's all about exams, and it's with the artist at the moment creating all the lovely pictures that are going to go into the book. That's written based on my work as a moderator for one of the exam boards, OCR, and my work with the examiners that I work with at college, and good results that we've had over the last 25 years at college, to be honest. For exam questions, it's really hard exam questions. And so what I've done is I've created this exam task board, and this is really interesting. It's originally created for Farnborough, but I think Oka are going to create one where it won't have the college logo on. But what's really interesting is for that student to be able to decode the exam question. When your children go and take their GCSE exams in a school somewhere or A-levels, it's really important to be able to decode that. Is it GCSE or is it A-level? What's the subject? What's the topic? And that's really important because I've had students that supposed to be writing about the digestive system and did a beautiful circulatory system essay for their exam and got no points. So it's really important that they know what the topics are and they know the key words. In any exam, there are lots and lots of different types of questions, and coming into fashion again are multiple choice questions. You'll have short answers, you'll have fill in the gap, tick in the box, you have diagrams. And for those diagrams, it's really good to make models and then work out what the different things are in that diagram. Comprehension, dyslexic students find comprehension hard. And then we've got longer response questions, which you would probably call an essay question. Description, analysis, an outline, a justification, or an assessment. Now, the examiner's 5 ideas are really important. One of the most important things training your children for an exam is to know the command verbs. Working for OCR, we actually moderate coursework using command verbs, and we also write exams using command verbs. So if those students know what identify, name, list, describe, explain, analyze, and evaluate mean, they're one step ahead of the others. They need to know what the key word is that they need to use in the question, or word or words. And what is that hook? And when I listen to you discussing with one another over the last few days, you use the word peg, I use the word hook. So are we going to use mnemonics? Are we going to use a story? Are we going to use a song? Are we going to use a mind map? Are we going to use a revision card? Are we going to do a video? What is it we're going to use? What are those key questions we need, those key words we need in the answer? And what are the paragraph headings we're going to use? But what's really interesting is if you have however many marks, some of my students say, well, how many lines do I need to write? And it's really important for that child to be able to dissect that exam question and work that out for themselves. How much time do I take? 1 mark, 1 minute. However, if you're given the command verb identify, name, or list, that will be a 1 mark answer, and you literally just put the word down, move on to the next one, give yourself more time for the bits you can't do. I've put here possible answers to questions, because if it's analyze or evaluate, you might have to use pros and cons. You might have to justify the information. You might be linking it to your own opinions, the opinions of others, and or theory. What the exam boards are looking for are levels of response, and basically the levels of response are level 1 is basic, level 2 is sound, and level 3 is in depth. Okay, have you used the correct terminology? But as you're going through exam questions, you can really see what doesn't the student understand? What do they understand a little bit, and what do they fully understand? And that's really important, because if they actually identify what they don't understand, they can then ask for help or look somewhere else, or ask you as parents what to do, or find the answer on the internet. How to answer the questions. It could be pros and cons. It could be point, example, explanation, relate. It could be evidence. It could be explain. And related your own opinions, the opinion of others, and also theory. But you know what? The most important thing that children need to know is If you believe, you can achieve. And that is written over my door in my classroom. And if you link that back to Charlotte Mason, I am, I can, I ought, I will. It's all about self-belief. Today, I've spoken about the history. I've spoken about Charlotte Mason all those years ago and what we did, how nature was important, how nature walks were really important, how climbing trees was important, gross motor skills, the early years, the difficulties you have with literacy and numeracy, the key stages 1 to 5, and those different techniques you can use in order to enable those students or children to remember the information ready for their exams. Over the last few days, I've been listening in on discussion groups and heard the word memory work mentioned. And this would be how you would remember it, how you can sort of boost that memory by doing it in so many, many different ways. There are videos that I've produced, and this video, Multisensory Techniques for Teaching Science, is available on the internet for free. And that is published by the British Dyslexia Association and is used for their training. Ochre Books came in and filmed me in my classroom. Bambi came up with her team and we spent a whole day more or less there, didn't we? And then they broke the videos down into different sections, and you can see those on YouTube as well. So thank you very much for listening. I think I've gabbled through very, very quickly today. I hope you enjoyed the talk. I hope you've got a takeaway. You can find something you can use with your children. And you can find me at Dr. Susie Nyman on Twitter, or you will find some of the resources I've spoken about, such as the dinosaurs, so you can get some downloads of those and create your own. That's my college email, and that's my consultancy email. So thank you very much. Any questions? Back to Kat, isn't it? Kat's in charge.
Yes. Thank you
Did we
very
do
much.
that? Was that okay?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you. If anybody does have any questions for Susie now, could you pop those in the chat, and she could maybe go through some of those now. Or if you just want to wave or put your hand up or a thumbs up or whatever on your screen, and we can, and then you, I'll just unmute you, and you can ask her yourself. You will also be able to go onto the Hoover app and ask her anything on there. I know she's already been on and answered a lot of the questions that have been asked. I can't actually see anybody at the moment who is wanting. So just put your thumbs up or hands up on the app, or wave if you do want to ask anything. Oh, here we go on the chat. We have, oh, thank you so much. What's the best age to get a child assessed?
You see, I've had that question over the last few days.
Yeah.
And so I phoned the Oracle. I phoned my friend who's a Senko at a school that I worked with at the Oratory years ago. She said year 5 or 6. But if I can give you some more information on that, because there was someone that asked me that, she said to me that she's been working with a boy who was assessed for dyslexia, also ASD, and he went to the school in year 9 once he got his assessment, and he was introduced to the curriculum support team. Now, he will need a special room on his own, so he was shown around the suite of rooms and said, this is where you would do your exams. Now, that's year 9. Then she said she's invited him to come in during the mock so that he can practice and visualize doing his exams during the mock time with the other boys and girls. So that's a really good thing as well. And then he will take the exams with the other children. So once you've got the dyslexia assessment, it's good to find the school you think your children are going to take those exams and maybe interact with them a little bit. It's only 2 or 3 days out, you know, it's, or half a day or something like that, I don't know. I mean, she described it over 3 different days, so every school's different too, so yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. And then we've had somebody's pop a note on there. For anyone interested in your multisensory teaching toolkit, it can be purchased from the website.
Yeah,
From one of the Ochre Books website.
that's right. Yeah, it's from Ochre Books website. Bambi's on. I can see her face at the moment. Bambi, do you want to say anything? Do you want to? It says Harry Gardner there. Do you want to unmute Harry Gardner?
Oh, yeah. I think they might be able to do it themselves, actually. Let's unmute them.
There we go. Bambi, can you say something about Ochre Books?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I'm Harry Gardner because I'm clearly technically...
Oh, I can only just hear you. I don't know if you can get closer to your mic.
Turn your volume up.
Hang on. Is that any better?
I don't know if you can get any closer to your mic because we can only just hear you.
Better?
Oh.
Yes.
That's good. Okay, headphones out. That's better. That's better. Hi, everybody. That was brilliant listening to Susie, because all the things that Susie has to say is quite interesting, because our publishing company, we specialise in producing revision guides for dyslexic children. And I started the business, 8 years ago now, because my daughter's severely dyslexic and really struggled with accessing curriculum-based information. It's obviously slightly different for all of you because you're home educating, but equally it's quite hard, as you've probably found, to find textbooks that are simple enough in terms of comprehension and the actual written text for a dyslexic child, but aren't really babying them, and they're not having to go back to things that are much too young for their actual academic age. So that's why we started Ochre Books. But it's interesting listening to what Susie has to say, that all of her knowledge from all those years ago, actually an awful lot of that has gone into the packs that we've produced. So we have lots of illustrations. We use storyboarding all the time, even in our science packs, they're all really storyboarded. So it's very simple for children to follow. And we also include a lot of active learning. So with history packs, rather than using the little Playmobil people, which are absolutely brilliant, and that's how I started with my daughter, we've made little character cards so they can, and active learning maps, so the children can actually reenact events or activities that have happened. And it is that multisensory, doing things in different ways, that makes a huge difference in their memory retention. And obviously it's not quite so vital for you always in terms of the exams, because you're not having termly exams, but ultimately your children will probably sit exams, and being able to activate that really is important, and be able to remember things when they get into that situation. So yeah, the multisensory is really key in helping embed information.
Yeah, lovely. Well, just quickly, because we only got a couple of minutes, but I don't know if you could answer. There's a couple here. Do you know how you access assessment as a home educator? And somebody else wondering how exam concessions work for external candidates. Don't know if you could answer those.
Well, that was the same thing as I said before. So
yeah.
Basically, if you link with the local school that you're going to do your exams in, they will have a particular assessor that they use, because years ago when I started the oratory, you could get anybody to do the dyslexia assessment and you could get anybody to do exam arrangements. But now that has been tightened up, so you have to use the one that the school is linked to. So see, wherever the local school is, get to the Senko somehow and say, who do you recommend to have a dyslexia assessment? Then if you have it with that person, then they'll read it and they'll be happy to accept it. Once, if they say, yes, you've got dyslexia and you need exam arrangements, there will be a specialist assessor that will assess your child for those exam arrangements. That could be extra time. It could be that you have to be separated in a different room due to anxiety. It could be that you have a scribe in extreme cases, or you might have a reader, but the reader pens from scanning pens, they're using a lot more of those to save on readers. So the key is to link with the school, find out who they use and use the same person. What my cousin has done, however, is he's linked up with a Helen Arkell Centre. They're originally based in Frensham, And they have satellite centres around the southeast. They have one at Bell House, which is in Dulwich, and they have others as well because he went to a different one. So they're sort of branched out. So you may find, or phone up the BDA and see if they've got a dyslexia assessor in your area that you might be able to link up with to get some advice.
Susie,
Yeah.
do you know how it works? Because one of the things that I had a problem with my daughter was she had to have a reader and a scribe.
Yeah.
But she really needed that practice of doing that.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can just say, I need a reader and a scribe, rock up to your exam and it go really, really well, because it doesn't generally. Well, in my experience, it was a bit of a disaster. So I think it's important that you do have the opportunity to be practicing. But I don't know how it works for home ed people if you don't have the teacher in.
Yeah, if I can just interrupt there, I know that there's a couple of exam centres around the country who do have like Senko units who
Yes.
will work with the kids. So a lot of the Senkos or the helpers for the scribes and stuff will have met the kids beforehand if they're local enough to do so. So there is also that option as well. But no, I agree that your child does need to.
So the boy I did the Cornell notes for, he was really struggling in chemistry and they thought he was going to fail. And then I developed all these multisensory techniques for him. And he was assessed, and they assessed him to have a scribe and a reader. Now that scribe and reader has to be someone that doesn't teach him. You can't have a maths teacher being a scribe and a reader for a maths exam. It's a little bit dodgy, should we say. So he had the scribe who was the Senko of the school. So she hadn't taught him, I had taught him chemistry. And by doing that, he actually got an A at the end of the year. And when I started teaching him in October, he knew a lot of things, but it was all mixed up. With dyslexics, you have the information, it's like a filing cabinet in all the wrong drawers, and you need someone to unravel it all and put it all back together again. It's quite fascinating. But he did really well having his scribe, but he did practice with her. He practiced with her in the mocks. And obviously he has her throughout all his GCSEs, and he'll have it for his, well, he won't have it for his A-levels because he finishes this year, and they're all assessed grades, aren't they?
Yeah. Just one more from Abby, but then we really do need to go because we've got the closing one in 5 minutes. My daughter's quite a few years before she's doing exams, so I just wondered if there was a way before exam age, but I guess that would be private then. She's saying for 2 access assessments, I guess.
You generally do access arrangements in the year 9. They do something called a lucid test. It's a computerized test, and the student does this, and they can tell from your processing skills, your free writing skills and everything, whether you have dyslexia or not. They're only valid for a certain amount of time, so you might have to have another test at the beginning of the year 11 to see if you still need those access arrangements, because sometimes children get better and they don't actually need them anymore.
So I guess it's just doing it before you, because whenever obviously the home ed community do it across all different ages, so getting it on the run up to
the exams.
Yeah. Okay, we do need to head off, I'm afraid. Please do contact Susie via the app if you have any more questions. Don't know if you want to unmute yourself to say thank you or whatever, but yes, thank you all very much.
Thank you. I hope you found it useful.
Thank you. Really, thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thanks, Bambi.
Thank you. Bye, Susie.
Bye.
Bye.